He didn't walk into court wearing a normal jail uniform. He was wearing something designed to keep him alive. No shoelaces, no belt, no strings. Thick, tear-resistant fabric meant for people the system believes might not survive what comes next. Before a single charge was read out loud, the message was already clear. This wasn't just a murder case. This was a countdown. Nick Reiner stood there in shackles, silent, facing accusations that could erase the rest of his life. 2 people dead, both of them his parents. And yet the court's first concern wasn't punishment or guilt. It was whether he'd make it to trial at all. Because when someone is charged with something this heavy, the danger doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it comes from being left alone with what's coming next. And to understand why the system treated this case like a ticking clock, you have to go back to the moment everything collapsed. The courtroom was quiet, but everything about him was loud. Nick Reiner didn't speak. He didn't look around. He stood there shackled, wearing a vest the court almost never wants the public to notice. It wasn't there for optics. It wasn't symbolic. It was there because the system had already flagged him as someone who might not survive the wait. Judges don't order that kind of protection lightly. It's reserved for defendants assessed as immediate risks. People overwhelmed by the weight of what they're facing. And what Nick was facing was absolute. 2 counts. Special circumstances. No bail. No chance to go home, not even temporarily. The judge set the arraignment weeks away and ordered him held under constant watch. Every day until then would be spent in a cell designed to remove choice, privacy, and even basic comfort. This wasn't about whether he was guilty yet. That question would come later. This was about keeping him breathing long enough for the legal system to do its job. And that raises a question most people don't think about. What kind of case makes the court worry more about survival than escape? The charges were read clinically, but the meaning behind them was anything but. 2 counts of first-degree murder. Special circumstances. A deadly weapon allegation involving a knife. Each phrase carried its own weight, but together they formed a sentence long before any verdict was reached. If convicted, there would be no second chance, no future hearing, no possibility of walking free. Cases like this usually take time to build. Days of investigation, weeks of analysis. But here, prosecutors moved fast. Within hours of the bodies being discovered, they had a suspect, an arrest, and a charging decision that signaled absolute confidence in what they believed happened. That speed matters. It tells you how strong the state thinks its case is. Special circumstances aren't added casually. They're reserved for situations where prosecutors intend to pursue the harshest outcome the law allows. Even in a state that no longer carries out executions, that language still closes doors permanently. And there was no bail, no temporary release. From the moment the charges were filed, Nick Reiner's life was reduced to one location and one outcome he couldn't escape. But the severity of the charges only deepens the mystery, because they don't explain how investigators zeroed in on him so quickly. And that part of the story unfolds far away from the courtroom. The first images the public saw didn't come from a crime scene. They came from a gas station. Security cameras captured Nick Reiner moving through a convenience store just hours before police closed in. No urgency, no visible panic. He walked the aisles, made a purchase, and left like anyone else stopping for gas. Ordinary movements that felt completely out of sync with what investigators were about to allege. Not long after that footage was timestamped, police had him in custody. There was no chase. No dramatic confrontation, no moment that played out like a crime show climax. Just handcuffs, a patrol car, and a sudden shift from everyday anonymity to national headlines. By the end of the day, he wasn't a son or a private citizen anymore. He was the sole suspect in a double homicide. That compressed timeline is what stands out. From discovery to arrest to charges, everything happened at a speed usually reserved for cases where investigators believe the evidence leaves very little room for doubt. And once the arrest was made, the door didn't just close behind him. It locked. Because what came next wasn't just jail, it was a level of confinement reserved for defendants the system considers too dangerous, too fragile, or both. Jail isn't a single place. It's a system of categories. The moment Nick Reiner was booked, the process started stripping everything down. Personal belongings taken, identity reduced to a file. But for someone facing charges this severe, intake doesn't stop at fingerprints and photographs. It goes deeper. Medical screening comes first, then the psychological evaluation, and that's where cases like this separate from the rest. Being accused of killing family members immediately raises red flags. Add the media attention, the life without parole exposure, and the speed of the charges, and the risk profile changes fast. The system doesn't wait for cracks to show, it assumes pressure will create them. That's how administrative segregation enters the picture. Isolation from the general population. Restricted movement. Limited interaction. Sometimes 23 hours a day in a single cell, with 1 hour carved out for basic necessities under supervision. No group meals. No programs. No casual conversations. Every interaction becomes procedural. Commands. Compliance. Silence in between. And unlike defendants who post bail and prepare their defense from home, Nick had no escape valve. Every meeting with his attorney happened inside the facility. Every decision about his future was made while sitting under fluorescent lights, watched by corrections officers. This wasn't punishment handed down by a jury. This was containment, based purely on what he was accused of. And for some people, that kind of waiting becomes more dangerous than the sentence itself. That vest wasn't a one-time decision. It was the end result of an assessment. In high-risk cases, mental health staff are trained to look for warning signs most people never see. Sudden loss of freedom, total collapse of routine, the shock of facing a future that may already be decided. For defendants charged with multiple murders, especially involving family, the danger window opens immediately. The first days in custody are the most volatile. Court appearances make it worse. That's when reality stops feeling abstract and becomes permanent. And when someone crosses a certain threshold, the system acts fast. Suicide prevention clothing is designed to remove options. Thick, quilted material. No fasteners. Nothing that can be twisted, tied, or repurposed. Once it's issued, observation increases. Checks become constant. Privacy disappears completely. Sleep happens under watch. Meals are eaten in view of staff. Even the most basic human moments are monitored. Personal items vanish. Shoelaces, belts, sheets, all gone. Even plastic utensils are counted and collected. It's a strange contradiction. A man accused of ending 2 lives is now surrounded by protocols meant to preserve his own. Taxpayer money funds the watch. Professionals monitor his mental state. Not because of sympathy, but because the system requires him alive to proceed. The vest becomes a message without words. We believe you might not make it. And once that label is applied, it follows you everywhere. But the most unsettling part isn't the monitoring. It's what makes this case so hard to reconcile. Because years earlier, this story looked completely different. Years before the courtroom and the vest, Nick Reiner was telling a very different story. In 2015, he co-wrote a film with his father called Being Charlie. It wasn't fiction pulled from nowhere. It was personal. The movie followed a young man battling addiction, cycling through recovery, relapsing, trying to stay afloat while navigating a complicated relationship with his father. Rob Reiner directed it. Nick helped write it. Father and son working side by side, turning real struggle into something public. In interviews from that time, they spoke openly about addiction, treatment, and how hard it is to stay clean when expectations and pressure never let up. The film didn't glamorize recovery. It showed setbacks, frustration, the slow grind of trying to survive your own mind. Critics called it raw, honest, more confession than entertainment, and that's what makes this case so disorienting. There's no public record of violence between Nick and his parents. No prior charges. No documented incidents that hinted at what prosecutors now allege happened years later. The past, at least on paper, doesn't point forward. A father helping his son tell a story about survival. A son trying to explain what he'd lived through. That work still exists. The interviews are still archived. But now, every frame of that film is shadowed by what came next. And it leads to the question no one seems able to answer. Why? For a case this public, the silence is unsettling. No motive has been officially released. No argument, no documented fallout, no final breaking point that investigators have shared with the public. Just 2 lives lost and a son accused of taking them, with nothing explaining why. That absence matters. In most high-profile cases, details leak quickly. Friends speak out. Neighbors remember warning signs. A narrative forms, even if it's incomplete. Here, there's nothing solid to grab onto. And that vacuum invites speculation. Without answers, the mind fills in gaps. Addiction history gets scrutinized. Old interviews get replayed. Every past struggle gets reframed through the worst possible lens. But none of it explains what happened inside that house. While the public searches for meaning, Nick Reiner sits in the same concrete space under the same fluorescent lights, waiting. Waiting for arraignment. Waiting for discovery. Waiting for a process that moves slowly, no matter how fast the arrest happened. That waiting can stretch for months. Sometimes years. And all of it happens before a single juror is sworn in. The system calls this due process. But when someone is held in conditions designed to prevent self-harm before they've been convicted of anything, the line between protection and punishment starts to blur. And that's where this story leaves us, not with answers, but with a question that doesn't go away. At some point, this case will move forward. There will be an arraignment. A plea. Motions argued in courtrooms far quieter than the headlines. Eventually, a jury will be asked to decide what happened inside that house and whether Nick Reiner will ever walk free again. But long before any verdict, the punishment has already taken shape. A cell built to prevent escape of any kind. A vest designed to keep someone alive against their own thoughts. Days measured not by freedom or choice, but by observation and waiting. All of it imposed before guilt is proven, because the system believes the risk is too high to do anything else. If the allegations are true, nothing can undo what was lost. 2 lives ended, a family erased. No legal process can make that right. But if justice means more than an outcome, if it means fairness, restraint, and humanity, then cases like this force an uncomfortable question. How much should someone endure before they've been convicted of anything at all? Nick Reiner will stand before a judge and enter a plea. Until then, the system's priority is simple. Keep him alive long enough to face what comes next. And whether that's justice, or something else entirely, is something each viewer has to decide for themselves.